All right, welcome to another video. For those of you who have been involved, you know that we've been discussing Project 2025 by reading through it and giving a little commentary on some of it, where we can, because a lot of what we've been going through lately has been more educational than anything, as far as breaking down the different agencies, and we're going to basically continue doing that today. So today we're actually going to be going into the central personnel agencies and managing the bureaucracy according to the authors of Project 2025 for this section. This is going to be section 3. We are actually broke 100 pages, so we're in the second set of, or the second 100 pages of the book. We still have a long way to go, but we are in the second set of pages. Now, as always, uh, I'm not going to take long with the introduction, but if you are here or if you are on YouTube, thank you for showing up. Thank you for the replays, the people who are watching the replays, rather. And what we're going to do is get on into it. Now, make sure that you hit the like button, leave a comment, of course, with your concerns or with your opinions. It doesn't matter, in the comment section. And if you are not subscribed to the channel on YouTube, it is in the court of public opinion. You do have to type out 59.99. So in the court of public opinion, 5999. That's what you're going to have to do to get the channel to actually come up. Okay, we definitely do want to, we definitely appreciate you subscribing to the channel. We're trying to get to 100 at this point. That is our next goal. And yeah, we thank you for subscribing if you subscribe. All right, so we're going to get into it. Essential personnel agencies managing the bureaucracy. And you can see the authors of this section are Donald Devine, Dennis Dean Kirk, and Paul Dans. Okay, so this is the overview. It says, from the very first mandate for leadership, the personnel is policy. Theme has been a fundamental principle guiding the government's personnel management at the as the U.S. Constitution makes clear. The president's appointment, direction, and removal authorities are the central elements of his executive power. In implementing that power, the people and the president deserve the most talented and responsible workforce possible. Who the president assigns to design and implement his policy agenda will determine whether he can carry out the responsibility given to him by the American people. The president must recognize that whoever holds a government position sets its policy. To fulfill an electoral mandate, he must therefore give personnel management his highest priority, including cabinet level presidents. The federal government's immense bureaucracy spreads into hundreds of agencies and thousands of units, and is centered and overseen at the top by key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. The major separate personnel agencies in the national government today are the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, the Merit Systems, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, and the Office of Special Counsel. Okay, so we're going to be getting into that. Just a second here. I'm so sorry. Okay, that was important. Okay, let's get into it. So it says Title charges the OPM with executing, administering, and enforcing the rules, regulations, and laws governing the civil service. It grants the OPM direct responsibility for activities like retirement, pay, health, training, federal unionization, suitability, and classification functions not specifically granted to other agencies by statute. The agent's director is charged with aiding the president, as the president may request, in preparing such civil service rules as the president prescribes, and otherwise advising the president on actions that may be taken to promote an efficient civil service and a systematic application of the merit system principles, including recommending policies related to the selection, promotion, transfer, performance, pay, conditions of service, tenure, and separation of employees. The MSPB is the lead adjunctor for hearing and resolving cases and controversies for 2.2 million federal employees. It is required to conduct fair and neutral case adjudications, regulatory reviews, and actions and studies to improve the workforce. Its court-like adjunctions investigate and hear appeals from agency actions such as furloughs, suspensions, demotions, and terminations, and are appealable in the U.S. Court of Appeals. The FLRA hears appeals on agency personnel cases involving federal labor grievance procedures to provide judicial review with binding decisions appealable to appeal courts. It interprets the rights and duties of agencies and employee labor organizations on management rights, OPM interpretations, recognition of labor organizations, and unfair labor practices under the general principle of bargaining in good faith and compelling need. The OSC serves as an investigator, publisher, and prosecutor before the MSPB with respect to agency and employees regarding prohibited personnel practices, Hatch Act politicization, uniform service employment, and reemployment rights, whistleblower complaints. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, known as the EEOC, has general responsibility for reviewing charges of employee discrimination against all civil breaches. However, it also administers a government employee section that investigates and adjudicates federal employee complaints equal employment violations as with the private sector. This makes the agency an additional de facto factor in government personnel management. While not a personnel agency per se, the General Services Administration, also known as the GSA, is charged with general supervision of contractors in government, and there are a civil service, and there are more contractors in government than there are civil service employees. The GSA must therefore be a part of any personnel management discussion. Analysis and recommendations. Okay. Federal bureaucracy. At the very pinnacle of the modern progressive program to make government competent stands the ideal professionalized career civil service. Since the turn of the 20th century, progressives have sought a system that could effectively select, train, reward, and guard from partisan influence the neutral scientific they believe are required to staff the national government and run the administrative state. The U.S. system is initiated by the Pendleton Act of 1880, institutionalized by the 1930s New Deal to set principles and practices that are meant to ensure that expert merit rather than partisan favors or personal favoritism ruled within the federal bureaucracy. With the civil service has grown, generating calls to drain the swamp, it has become clear that their project had serious unintended consequences. The civil service was devised to replace the amateurism and presumed corruption of the old spoils system, wherein government jobs reward loyal partisans who might or might not have professional backgrounds. Although the system appeared to be sufficient for the nation's first century, progressive intellectuals and activists demand a more scientific and political neutral administration. Progressives designed a merit system to promote expertise and to shield from partisan political pressure, but is soon servants for accountability. The modern merit system increasingly made it almost impossible to fire all but the most incompetent civil servants. Complying with arcane rules regarding recruitment, rating, hiring, and firing simply placed the goals of cultivating competence and expertise. In the 1970s, Georgia Democratic Governor Jimmy Carter, then a political unknown, ran for president supporting New Deal programs and their Great Society expansions, but opposing the way they were being administered. The policies were not actually reducing poverty, increasing prosperity, or improving the environment, he argued, and to make them work required fundamental bureaucratic reform. He correctly charged that almost all government employees were rated as successful, all received the same pay regardless of performance, and even the worst were impossible to fire, and he won the presidency. President Carter fulfilled his campaign promise by hiring Syracuse University Dean Allen Campbell, who served as who served first as chairman of the U.S. Civil Service Commission and then as director of the and helped him devise the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 to reset the basic structure of today's bureaucracy. A new performance appraisal system was devised with a 5 rather than 3 distribution of rating categories and individual goals, more related to agency missions and more promotion for all. Pay and benefits were based directly on improved performance appraisals, including sizable bonuses for mid-level managers and senior executives. But time ran out on President Carter uh, before the act could fully be executed. So it was left up to President Ronald Reagan and his new OPM and agency leadership to implement. Overall, the new law seemed to work for a few years under Reagan, but Carter's reforms were dissipated within a decade. Today, employee evaluation is back to perform levels with almost all rated successful or above, frustrating any relation between pay and performance. An outstanding rating should be required for senior executive services, also known as SES, chiefs to win big bonuses. But a few years ago, when it was disclosed that veteran administration executives who encouraged false reporting on hospital admissions were rated outstanding. The senior justified it, telling Congress that only outstanding performers would be promoted to the SES in the first place, and that precise rating. The Government Accounting, also known as the GAO, however, has reported that the within pay within grade pay increases and locality pay for regular employees and executives have become automatic rather than based on performance as a result of most employees being rated at similar appraisal levels. OPM, merit hiring in a merit system. It should not be impossible even for a large national government to hire good people through a merit selection. The government did so for years, but it has proven difficult in recent times to select persons skills and abilities as the law dictates. Yet, for the past 34 years, the U.S. Civil Service has been unable to distinguish consistently between strong and unqualified employment. As the Carter presidency was winding down, the U.S. Department of Justice and top lawyers at the OPM contrived with plaintiffs to end civil service IQ examinations because of concern about their possible impact on minorities. The the Professional Examination, also known as PACE, General Intelligence Exam to select college graduates for employment, but Carter administration officials, probably without the president's informed abolished the PACE through a legal consent court decree. Capitul- is that what I capitulating to demands by civil rights petitioners who contended that it was discriminatory. Was to last only 5 years, but still controls federal hiring and is applied to general ability tests like the PACE have been used successfully to assess the usefulness and cost effectiveness of broad intellectual qualities across many separate occupations. Courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt intentional discrimination, such result. This doctrine of dis, this doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by the future administration. In any event, the federal government has been denied the use of interest entry examination for 3 decades. Self-evaluations that have forced managers to resort to subterfuge, such as pre-selecting friends or associates that they believe are qualified employees. In 2015, President Barack Obama's OPM began to introduce an improved merit examination called USA, which it had been testing quietly since 2012 and sees 4 dozen job descriptions. The test had multiple choice questions with only one correct answer. Some questions even required that would change regularly to depress cheating. President Donald Trump's OPM planned to implement such changes, but was legal concerns over possible desperate impact. Courts have agreed to review the consent decree of the Uniform Guidelines of Employee Selection Procedures. Technical requirements for sound exams are reformed. A government that is unable to select employees based on KSA like test qualifications cannot work, and the OPM must move forward on this very basic personnel management obligation. Next is the centrality of performance appraisal. In the meantime, the OPM must manage the workforce it has. Before they can reward or discipline federal employees, managers must first identify who their top performers are and who is performing less than adequately. In fact, as Ludwig von Mises proved in his classic Bureaucracy, unlike the profit and loss in the private sector, government performance measurement depends on if they cannot be identified in the first place within a functional system, it is impossible to reward good performance or correct poor. Problem is that the collegial atmosphere in the bureaucracy is a multifaceted appraisal system that is open to appeals, makes this a very challenging ideal to implement successfully. The GAO report that overly high and widely spread performance ratings were again plaguing the government, with more than 90 employees rated fully successful or above by their managers. A mere 0.3% rated as mindfully successful, and a 0.1% actually rated unacceptable. Why? It is human nature that no one appreciates being told that he or she is less than outstanding in every way. Informing subordinates is a closely knit in a closely knit bureaucracy that are not performing well is difficult. Compatriots is even considered rude and unprofessional. Moreover, managers can be and often are accused of racial or sexual discrimination and this discourages honesty. In 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13839, requiring agencies to reduce the time for employees to improve performance before corrective action could be taken. Actions against poorly performing. Oh, I'm sorry. Just a second. Where are we? To initiate disciplinary actions against poorly performing employees more expeditiously, to reiterate that agencies are obligated to make employees improve, to reduce the time for employees to respond to allegations of poor performance, to mandate that agencies remind supervisors of expiring employee probationary periods, to prohibit agencies with entering agreements that modify an employee's personnel record, and to reevaluate procedures for agencies to discipline supervisors who retaliate against whistleblowers. Unfortunately, the order was overturned by the Biden administration to be used in 2025. The fact remains that meaningfully evaluate employees' performance is a critical part of a manager's job. In the Reagan appraisal process, managers were evaluated on how they themselves rated their subordinates. This is critical to responsibility and improved management. That political executives build policy goals directly to employee success and for employees who know what is expected. Indistinguishable from the coworkers on paper, hardworking federal employees often for their efforts and federal workers who are performing inadequately get neither the benefit of the honest appraisal nor clear guidance on how to improve. Political executives, political executives should take an active role in supervising performance appraisals of career staff, not unduly delegate this responsibility to senior management, and be willing to reward and support good performance. Performance appraisals means merit pay. That's what we're talking about. Performance appraisal means little to daily operation consequences for success as well as failure. According to a survey of major U.S. private companies, which, unlike the federal government, also have a profit and loss evaluation, 90% use a system of merit pay for. Despite early efforts to institute merit pay throughout the federal government, however, compensation is still based primarily on seniority rather than merit. Merit pay for executives and managers as part of the Carter reforms and was implemented early in the Reagan presidency. Beginning in the summer of 19 entered 18 months of negotiations with House and Senate staff on extended merit pay to the entire workforce. Long and detailed talks between the OPM and both Democrats and Republicans in Congress ensued, and a final agreement was reached in 1983 that supposedly ensured the passage of legislation creating a new performance management and recognition system, also known as PMRS, for all, not just management, GS 13 through GS 15 employees. Meanwhile, regulations to expand the role of performance related to pay throughout the entire workforce, but congressional allies, the employee unions led by Representative Steny Hoyer, Democratic of Government employee Marilyn Rich, stoutly resisted this extension to pay for performance. Strong union support used the congressional appropriations process to block OPM administrative pay reforms. Bonuses for SES career employees survived. Performance appraisals became high and widely distributed, that there was little relationship between performance and remuneration. Remuner, okay. Ever since the original merit pay system for federal 13 through GM 15 grade levels, just below the SES, to expire in September 1993. Little been done either to reinstate the federal merit pay program or to distribute performance rating evaluations for the SES, much less extend the program to the remainder of the workforce. A reform-friendly president and Congress must just provide the opportunity to create a more comprehensive performance plan. In the meantime, however, political executives should use existing pay and especially fiscal awards strategically to reward good performance and to the degree allowed by law. Next section, making the appeals process work. The normality government dismissal rate is well known, is well below 1%, and no private sector industry employee enjoys the job security that a federal employee enjoys. Both safety and justice demand that the managers learn to act strategically to hire good and fire poor performers legally. The initial paperwork required to separate poor or abusive performers when they are infrequently identified is not overwhelming, and managers might be motivated to act if for the appeals and enforcement process. Formal appeal in the private sector is most simple two-step process, but government unions and associations have been able to convince politicians to support a multiple and extensive appeals and enforcement process. As noted, there are multiple administrative appeal bodies. The FLRA, OSC, and EEOC have narrow jurisdictions. Claims that an employee's removal or disciplinary actions violate the term of a collective bargaining agreement and a union are handled by the FLRA. Employees who claim their removal was a result of discrimination can appeal to the EEOC, and if their firing was retribution for being a whistleblower, can go to the O. While the MSPB specializes in abuses of direct issues, it can and does hear the review almost any of the matters heard by the other agencies. Cases involving race, gender, religion, age, pregnancy, disability, and national origin can be appealed to the EEOC or the MSPB, and in some cases to both, and to the OSC. This gives employees to prove their cases, and while the EEOC, MSPB, FLRA, and OSC may all apply essentially the same burden of proof, the odds of success may be substantially different in each forum. In fact, forum shopping among them for a friendlier venue is a common practice, but frequent face no consequences for frivolous complaints. As a result, meritorious cases denying relief and justice to truly aggrieved individuals. The MSPB can and does handle all such matters, but it faces a backlog on an estimated 3,000 cases of people wrongfully who were potentially wrongfully or disciplined as far back as 2013. 2017 to 2022, the MSPB lacked the quorum required to decide appeals. January 23rd, 2023, the EEOC had a backlog of 42,000 cases. While federal employees win appeals relatively infrequently, MSPB administrative judge upheld agency decisions as much as 80% of the time. The real problem involved in the elaborate process that managers must undergo during appeals keeps even the best managers from bringing cases in all but most egregious cases of or misconduct. As a result, the MSPB, EEOC, FLRA, and OSC likely see very few cases compared to the number of occurrences, and non performers continue to be paid and often are placed in non work positions, having it unique to the government. If lower priority issues were addressed in home, serious adverse actions would be less subject to delay. With the proper limitation of the labor union actions, the FLRA should have limited reason for appeals. The EEOC's federal employees, many of the OCS's investigatory functions should be returned to the OPM. The MSPB could then become the main reviewer of adverse actions, greatly simplifying the burdensome appeals process, making civil service benefits economically and administratively rational. In recent years, the combined wages and benefits of the executive branch civilian workforce totaled 300 billion, according to the official data. But even that amount does not properly account for the billions of unfunded liability for retirement and other government reporting distortions. Official data also reported employment as approximately 2 million, but this ignores approximately 20 million contractors who, while not eligible for government pay and benefits, do receive them indirectly through contracting, even if they're less generous. Official data also claimed that national government employees are less than private sector employees, are paid less than private sector employees are paid for similar work. But several more neutral sources demonstrate that public sector workers, all of this extravagance deserve close scrutiny. Market-based pay and benefits. According to a current law, federal workers are to be paid wages is comparable to equivalent private sector workers rather than compared to all private sector employees. While the official studies claim that federal employees are underpaid relative to the private sector by 20% or more, a 2016 Heritage Foundation study found that the federal employees receive wages that were 22% higher than wages of similar private sector workers. If the value of employee benefits was included, the total compensation premium for federal employees over their private sector equivalents increase to be between 30% and 40%. The American Enterprise Institute found a 14% pay premium and a 61% total compensation premium. Base salary is only one component of the federal employee's total compensation. In addition to high starting wages, federal employees normally receive an annual cost of living adjustment available to all employees and generous scheduled raises known as step increases. Moreover, a large proportion of federal employees are stationed at the Washington, D.C. area and other large cities and are entitled to steep locality payments enhancements to account for the high cost of living in these areas. A federal employee with 5 years of experience receives 20 vacation days, 13 paid sick days, and all 10 federal holidays compared to the employee at a large private company who receives 13 days of vacation and 8 paid sick days. Federal health benefits are more comparable to those provided by Fortune 500 employers who, with the government paying 72% of the weighted average premiums. But this is much higher than for most private plans. Almost half of private firms do not offer any employer contributions at all. The obvious solution to these discrepancies is to move closer to the market model for, uh-oh, go back. Okay. The obvious solution for these discrepancies is to move closer to a market model for federal pay and benefits. One need is for a neutral agency to oversee pay hiring decisions, especially for high demand occupations. The OPM is independent of agency operations, so it can assess requirements more neutrally. For many years, with a special pay rates program, the OPM evaluated claims that federal rates in any area were too low to attract competent employees and allow agencies to offer higher pay when needed rather than increase rates for all. Ideally, the OPM should establish an initial pay schedule for every occupation and region, monitor turnover rates and applicant to position ratios, and adjust pay and recruitment on that basis. Most of this requires legislation, but the OPM should be an advocate for the true equality of benefits between the public and private sectors. Reforming federal requirement benefits. I'm sorry, reforming federal retirement benefits. Career civil servants enjoy retirement benefits that are nearly unheard of in the private sector. Federal employees retire early, normally at age 55 after 30 years, enjoy richer pension annuities, and receive automatic cost of living adjustments based on the areas in which they retire. Defined benefit federal pensions are fully indexed inflate for inflation, a practice that is extremely rare in the private sector. A federal employee with a pre-retirement income of 25,000 under the older of the two federal retirement plans will receive at least 200,000 more over a 20-year period than will private sector workers with the same pre-retirement salary under historic inflation levels. During the early Reagan years, the OPM reformed many specific provisions of the federal pension program to save billions administratively. Under OPM pressure, Reagan old civil service retirement system, or also known as CSRS, entirely for new employees, which counting disbursements for the unfunded liability accounted for 51.3% of the federal government's total payroll. The retirement system that replaced it, the Federal Employees Retirement System, also known as FERS, reduced the cost of federal employee retirement disbursements to 28.5% of payroll, including contributions to Social Security and the employer match to the thrift savings plan. More of the pension cost was shifted to the employee, but the new system was much more equitable for the 40% who receive few to no benefits under the old system. By 1999, more than half of the federal workforce was covered by the new system, and the government's per capita share of the cost as the employer was less than half and cost of the old system, half the cost of the old system. 20.2% of FERS payroll versus 44.3 examples of government savings anywhere. Although the government pension system has become more like private pension systems, it still remains much more generous, and other means might be considered in the list. Got it. GSA, landlord and contractor management. The General Services Administration is best known for the federal government landlord, designing, constructing, managing, and preserving government buildings, and leasing and managing outside commercial real estate contracting with 376.9 million square feet of space. Obviously, at its prime function, real estate expertise is key to the GSA's success. However, the GSA is also the government's purchasing agent, connecting federal purchasers with commercial products and services in the private sector and their personnel management functions. With contractors performing so many functions today, the GSA therefore becomes a de facto part of government-wide personnel management. The GSA also manages the Presidential Transition Act, or the PTA process, which also directly involves the OPM. A recent proposal would have incorporated the OPM and GSA and OMB. Unfortunately, this did not take place in that form, but it would make sense for GSA and OPM leadership and staff to hold regular meetings to work through matters of common interest, such as moderating PTA personnel restrictions and the relationship between contract and civil service employees. Reductions in force. Reducing the number of federal employees seem an obvious way to reduce the overall expense of the civil service, and prior administrations haven't. Many prior administrations have attempted to do this. Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama began their terms, as did Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, by mandating a freeze on hiring of new federal employees, but these efforts did not lead to permanent and substantive reductions in the number of non-defense federal employees. First, it is a challenge even to know which workers to cut. As mentioned, there are 2 million federal employees, but since budgets have exploded, so has the total number of personnel, with nearly 10 times more federal contractors than federal employees. Contractors are less expensive because they are not entitled to high government pensions or benefits and are easier to fire and discipline. In addition, millions of state government employees work under federal grants and effective administering federal programs. These cannot be directly cut. Cutting federal employment may be helpful and can provide a simple story to average citizens, but cutting functions, levels, funds, and grants is more important than setting simple employment size. Simply reducing numbers can actually increase cost. OMB instructions following President Trump's employment freeze told agencies to consider buyout programs, encouraging early retirements in order to shift costs from current budget in agencies to the retirement system and minimize the number of personnel fired. The Environmental Protection Agency immediately implemented such a program and OMB urged the passages of to further increase spending under the cuts. President Clinton's OMB had introduced a similar buyout that cost the Treasury $2.8 billion, mostly for those who were going to retire anyway. Moreover, when a new employee is hired to fill a job recently vacated in a buyout, the government for the time is paying two people to fill one job. What is needed at the beginning in a freeze on all top career position hiring to prevent borrowing in or burrowing in or by outgoing political appointees. Moreover, four factors determine the order in which employees are protected during layoffs: tenure, veterans' preference, seniority, and performance in the order of importance. Despite several attempts in the House of Representatives during the Trump years to enact legislation that would modestly increase the weight given to performance over time of service, the fierce opposition by federal managers, associations, and unions representing long serving but not necessarily well performing constituents explains why the bill failed to advance. A determined president should insist that performance be first and be wary of cost types of reduction in force. Impenetrable bureaucracy. There are 100 actions that the executive branch or Congress could take to improve a broad range of government missions and functions. It identified 33 actions to address mission fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in the 12 areas of defense: economic development, health, homeland security, and information technology. It also identified 59 other opportunities for executive agencies to enhance revenue collection across 25 areas of government. A logical place to begin would be to identify and eliminate functions and programs that are duplicated across the cabinet departments or spread across multiple agencies. Congress hoped to help this effort by passing the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993, which required all federal agencies to define their missions, establish goals and objectives, and measure the report their performance to Congress. The Performance Act and measured the report their performance to Congress. 3 decades of endless time consuming reports later, the government continues to grow, but with more paper and little change each year. emphasizes the importance of increasing number of levels between the top heads of departments and the people at the bottom who receive the products of government. He estimates that there are perhaps 50 or more levels of impenetrable bureaucracy and no way between them. The Trump administration proposed possible consolidations, but these were not received favorably in Congress, whose approval is necessary for most such proposals. The best solution is to cut function and budgets and devolve responsibilities. This is a challenge primarily for presidents, Congress, and the entire government, but the OPM still leads the way government wide in managing personnel properly, even if any future smaller government. Creating a responsible career management service. The people elect a president who is in charge by Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, with things that directly linked to that legitimizing responsibility. An autonomous bureaucracy has nor separate moral legitimacy. Therefore, career civil servants by themselves should not lead major policy changes and reforms. The creation of the Senior Executive Service was the top career change introduced by the 1978 Carter-Campbell Civil Service Reform Act. Its aim was to professionalize the career service and make it more responsible to the while respecting rights due to employees, very much including those in top positions. The new SCS should allow executive positions and locations beyond narrow specialties for more efficient mission accomplishment and would pay and large bonuses to motivate career performance. The desire to infiltrate political appointees improperly into a higher career civil service has been Democratic administrations, however, are typically more successful because they require the cooperation of careerists. Hiring in requires career jobs descriptions for new positions that closely mirror the functions of a political appointee, a special hiring authority that allows the bypassing of veterans' preferences as well as other performance in the desired position. President Reagan's OPM began by limiting such SES burrowing in, arguing that the proper course was to create a RA principle and the political leadership of the bureaucracy and respects the professional autonomy of the career service. But this requires that career SES employees should respect political rights too. Key policy positions as career reserved to deny them to non-career SES employees frustrate. Hold on. Another evasion is this general domination by career staff on SES personnel evaluating boards. The opposite of non-career executives dominating these career training also often underplays the political role and leadership and inculcates career first policy and value viewpoints. Frustrated with these activities by top career executives, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 13957 to make career professionals as positions who discharge significant duties and exercise significant discretion in formulation and implementing executive branch policy and programs as an exception to the competitive hiring schedule F. In order If it ordered the director of OPM and agency heads to set procedures to prepare lists for such confidential, policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating positions, and prepare procedures to create exception positions from which they can relocate back to their regular civil service, such after such service. The order was subsequently reversed by President Biden as a demand of civil service associations and unions. It should be reinstated, but SES responsibility should come first. Okay, here we go. Managing personnel in a union environment. Historically, unions were thought to be line of the public sector unions is not primarily constrained. If private sector unions push too hard to bargain, they can so harm business and eliminate union jobs altogether. So demand can be excessive. Even Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt striking and even threatening threats of bargaining and delay were not until President John Kennedy that the union executed and then merely by executive order. Labor Congress to do so in order to pass the CSRA, although all bargaining was placed under OPM review. The CSRA was able to maintain a strong management rights for the OPM, and the agencies forbade collective bargaining to pay on overtime, OPM, FLRA, and agencies, personnel offices, and courts, especially bargaining expanded from management right contracted. But the management rights are still in statute, have been enforced by some administrations, and should be enforced again by any future OPM and agency managements, which should not be intimidated by union power. Rather than being daunted, President Trump issued 3 executive orders. Executive Order 13836, encouraging agencies to renegotiate all union collective bargaining agreements to ensure consistency with the law and respect of management rights. Executive Order 13837, encouraging agencies to prevent union representatives from using official time preparing or pursuing grievances, from engaging in other union activity, and 9, encouraging agencies both to limit labor grievances on removals from the service or on challenging performance appraisals, and should retain following reductions in force. All were revoked by the Biden administration and should be reinstated by the next administration, council, and reactivation of the impasses panel. Congress should also consider whether public sector up until the middle of the 20th century held that the unions were not compatible with constitutional government. So, good government management, it is hard to avoid reaching the same conclusion. Fully staffing the must rely legally on his top department and agency officials to run the government operations through regular cabinet and other meetings and communications. Without this political leadership, the career civil service becomes empowered to lead the executive branch. Without democratic is constitutionally and branch, both to assist him and to provide overall legitimacy. Most presidents have had some difficulty obtaining congressional approval of their appointees, but this has worsened recently. After the 2016 election, President Trump faced of presidential personnel, or PPO, did not generally remove political appointees from the previous administration, but instead relied mostly on prior political appointees and career civil servants to run the government. Such a reliance on holdovers and bureaucrats led to a lack of agency control and the absolute refusal of the acting attorney general